Hello, 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 and welcome to the Madison channel. My name is Madison, and today we have the start of spooky season on my channel. It's closing in on a year of the Madison channel existing. It'll be a year, January 5th, so that's crazy. But this is my very first October, and of course, because of the kind of creepy and scary nature of this channel, we have to make October special. But before we get into this whole situation, we will be, of course, discussing all of the Purge movies in the Purge series, which are 5 movies, so back to back to back, all of the Purge movies, and discussing more of the sociological things behind the scenes of each movie. But before we get into that, I just want to say, if you're new here, hello, welcome. My name is Madison. Please like, subscribe, comment below. Put on that bell notification so you know whenever I post. We do true crime centering BIPOC individuals on this channel. We do movie reactions. We do documentary reactions. We do show reactions with a sociological commentary twist. So if that's something that interests you, please subscribe and join the family. I also want to say hello. I know to all my older subscribers, hi, love you, kiss, kiss, kiss. I was in New York for 5 days, so I didn't post last week, and I had a wonderful time. If you were wondering, I was there for one of my oldest friends' birthdays, my friend Laura, and it was just a much needed break. But I'm back. We are going to handle this spooky season correctly, so stay tuned, strap up. If you've never seen the Purge movies, I'm not going to go point by point by point for any of that, but of course, again, if you're here, if you're part of the family, comment, like the video, all of the things so it does well in the algorithm. And please, both y'all, new and old, watch my ads. Your girl is newly monetized, and I'm trying to make that money, honey, so I can make this, a full-time thing. But yeah, as far as housekeeping, I think that's it. If you want to know my socials, they're in the description box below. I also am super active on TikTok, so be sure to follow me there. I go live there often, so follow me on TikTok so you can get to see more of my day-to-day life and stuff like that. Without further ado, let's introduce the First Purge movie and let's discuss how this is all going to work out and why I decided to do this for October. So, for a quick rundown before we get into breaking down the First Purge movie. When I say the First Purge, because there's the Purge and then there's the First Purge. The First Purge movie was a prequel made in 2018. The actual First Purge movie was made in 2013, but they made a prequel to that one in 2018. And we're going to start by discussing and breaking down the prequel, then going into the series as Rotten Tomato tells us to do. So we'll go prequel, then the actual First Purge movie, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and the fifth. You get what I mean. If you watch my first 2 videos, you'll know that I have a direct and distinct point of view as to what I want this channel to function as, right? It is a true crime channel at its core, but there's lots shrouded around that because there's lots of conversations around that. And the conversations we're actively having on this channel fall under this umbrella of history, sociology, racial relations, all of these things. And true crime is my love at the center of it, right? I am choosing actively on this channel and pledging to continue to do this every year when October comes to not take part in doing like a spooky true crime story thing during October, just in the sense that I feel like it's kind of unethical. And I'll tell you why. I'm not trying to call y'all out. I'm not trying to call any of your favorite girlies out. I'm just saying, I think that we all know the spooky season is upon us. It is kitschy. It is cool. People are telling scary stories. People are doing this. And to me, true crime isn't like a scary story to tell when it's spooky season. These are people's lives where their families are still alive. These are real life situations that happen to people all around the year. and to specifically hone in on spooky season and cash in on spooky season by picking stories that kind of reflect spooky season, to me is you kind of cashing in on, you know, the consumerism of the holiday and not really thinking about the victims of the case. You can do those cases at any time of year. And I think for me personally on this channel, I'm just going to stick to dissecting the fantastical world of horror movies during this time, and, you know, bringing them to real life and contextualizing them in real life through sociology, history, historical context, and all of that kind of thing, rather than deciding to use a victim's story in this time frame and add all the spookiness around it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys? And this is my second time watching it, but it's not going to be a beat by beat breakdown. We're going to do sociological commentary on the points that it brings up in all the movies. So don't expect me to be like fully reacting to them on screen, or that we're going to be like, in the first scene this and this happens. Like, no, we're not breaking it down like that. We're bringing it out, talking about it in a sociological context, because a lot of people don't fuck with the Purge movies like that. I adore them. I think they're amazing. And there's been a lot of new talk of different legislation happening in the country that resembles the Purge. But I think it's even more poignant today to talk about these Purge movies. So anyway, that's the introduction. So what you can expect is every week of October, I'm starting a little early because there's 5 Purge movies. I will be doing this sociological commentary on the Purge movies, the Purge series, the Purge universe, and drawing out sociological commentary as to how it relates to our day-to-day life for real, and historical context for some of the things that they're discussing. I just want to quickly shout out my sister and this absolutely gorgeous dream journal. It is a 12-week guided dream journal that has amazing prompts. It is absolutely super comprehensive to use and super high quality. Highly, highly recommend it. If you're interested in this, hit my Amazon storefront link in the bio so you can purchase it and try it out. Hope you love it. It basically is setting up the universe for which the Purge was created, the idea of the Purge. And the universe for which the Purge is created, we are in, this version of America is in financial strife, racial strife, all of the things that we're really dealing with now, honestly. Lots of poverty, unemployment, all of these things. And it was kind of crazy to watch post-pandemic, because it's like all of these things are just more exacerbated than they were in 2018, but still relevant. And you know, you have to understand, this is the thick of the Trump presidency in 2018, like middle of the pathway into the Trump presidency. So a lot of this and the creation of this movie is a direct response to that, I feel like, and it's really interesting. But essentially, it was made in 2018 as a prequel to how the Purge began to be a mainstay in society. And so what we learn in the beginning of the movie is that there is a new fanatical political party called the New Founding Fathers. Of course, it's very white and they have very extreme views. And the whole goal is, you know, we've, as Americans, pulled the old founding fathers' message as far as it could be pulled. So we are the new founding fathers, creating a new way of life in America that will eradicate poverty, eradicate all of these tensions that we're dealing with in society. It's so interesting because they obviously resemble, similar to like MAGA, and it's interesting in the news that we're having this distinction between Republicans and MAGA Republicans. To me, they're all the same. But anywho, so it's just interesting to see the parallels, and there's a ton of parallels to real life in this. But they are growing in the polls, and they finally get legitimacy by getting their first president from the party of the New Founding Fathers. And what they are proposing or trying to work out is dealing with the anger that the individual American is feeling and trying to address that problem, and what can they do to address that problem. So what they decide to do is create an experiment. Now, the experiment is happening on Staten Island only. It's not a nationwide experiment. So they're doing this first purge on Staten Island, and it's an experiment that's going to be heavily monitored, and they're trying to make it so it can go, nationwide. And the experiment is, of course, the purge. 1 day a year for 12 hours where murder is legal, rape is legal, robbery is legal, and everyone can get all their rocks off in 1 day, and seeing if that improves the state of being. Of course, there are twists and turns that have to do with race and all of that kind of stuff, but they picked Staten Island specifically because of the fact that there's Black people there, a good demographic of Black people, a lot of a demographic of poor people, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the setup for the mainstay of the movie, the point of view of where we fly into the movie to start. And it's a really interesting concept because as the movie goes on, you see how the first purge, this experimental thing, was not popular by everybody. There's lots of protests against it, and then it just happens, and how it turns into the Purge Cinematic Universe. So, that's kind of the point of view that we're flying into with the first purge. My honest opinions about the film, especially watching it for the second time, I remember really enjoying it in theaters in 2018. Like, I really, really liked it in the sense that, we all know, like, horror movies, the horror genre can be kind of trashy sometimes and isn't always the most intellectually sound genre. It can be kind of, slapped together or whatever. But what I felt with this movie and this particular movie, I was like, wow, this is actually really fucking good, and there's a lot being said in it. Acting wise, not the best. Not the best, to say the least. Kind of predictable acting wise. The actors in the film did okay, some did better than others. And just the pacing of the film is also okay. Like, there are parts that are so poignant and important that kind of lift the film up to be kind of better quality than it really is when you take it just as it is. But acting, it's kind of but concept, yes. So it kind of balances out to be, like, to me, a good movie. A lot of people don't like it. Like I said, a lot of people don't fuck with the Purge movies. I love them. Okay. So before we get into, like, a full rundown of how the movie goes, because we're going to start with, I'm going to tell you the cast of the movie, like who are the characters. Obviously, I'll put their pictures up. Then we're going to go into a summary of the movie. Then we are going to go into a very quick, brief summary of the movie from memory. Then we're going to go into sociological points of the movie. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, I think we're going to break down the cast and how they all relate to each other before we start with the summary, so you guys can get a sense of who's in the movie, what their role is, and then you'll better understand my summary of the film. First and foremost, who the movie is really, really centered around is Naya. Naya is an activist. She is a light-skinned Black woman who's an activist, and her acting, to be honest, in the movie is but she's an activist. She's big on her community, and she lives with her younger brother Isaiah in the projects for which this experiment is centered around. They are very they're in poverty. She works hard, she lives right, but she can't seem to catch a break. They live in the projects. Their apartment doesn't work, and that's a big theme. Their apartment complex is just run down, and she's just trying to make an honest living while also being an activist for her people. So she leads a lot of the protests that are anti this experiment and all of that. She's very passionate. Activist is like central to her point of view. So yeah, that's Naya. She's the main one. She is the older sister. We'll continue. Next, we have Dimitri. Now, Dimitri is actually played by the same guy who plays Daniel in Insecure, the one that Issa cheats on Lawrence with in the first season. He's very attractive, but he plays Dimitri, and Dimitri is Naya's ex-boyfriend. So they were once very much together. They broke up because they have a difference of opinions. Again, she's an activist and he's a drug dealer. He's a well-known drug dealer in the area. And their difference of opinion is just kind of like, he's like, this is my only way to make it out of this place. I'm just trying to make money for myself. And she looks at him as the villain for her people continuing to progress because he's flooding their area with drugs and violence and stuff. So they kind of broke off that difference of opinion, but they used to be together, and there's a lot of sexual tension between them. And it's very clear that he loves her a lot. Yeah, but Dimitri, his acting, pretty good. He did actually pretty good in this. He ends up being the savior of the movie, Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is the younger brother to Naya. He is very resentful about their position in society, the fact that they're poverty-stricken, and we'll get into his part in the summary right now. He does an okay job, but Dimitri also looks at him as a younger brother, and that's also important too to the course of the film. But yeah, Isaiah is a troublemaker. He's annoying, but he's the younger brother, and he's like, I hate being poor. That's his personality. I hate being poor in society. So yeah, the next person we have. Because, okay, so the way the movie works is there's the people on the ground, which are those people that I named, and a few other side characters that, are kind of important, but not too important to the story. And then there's the people running the experiment. So the chief of staff, his name is Arlo. He is the one who's helping run this experiment. So they have a doctor. Her name is Dr. Updale, who created the concept of the purge. She is a doctor psychologist behind conceptualizing the purge, this experiment, and what it can seem. So this is, again, an experiment that they're collecting data on. So she created the idea. Then Chief of Staff Arlo, who works for the new Founding Fathers regime, is helping her carry it out, and he's collecting that data in order to make sure that this can go nationwide. Okay, mind you, the whole nation is watching this experiment go down on their news, and so I just introduced you to two characters right there. And then the last character, who is another villain kind of the story. The real villain is the chief of staff in the new Founding Fathers, but we get to that later. But the real villain, the on the ground villain, is this guy named Skeletor. And he happens to be like the first person you meet in the entire movie. He is a dope fiend, and he is really enthusiastic about the purge. His character is larger than life. He has like all these scars on his face, and like he's just really scary. Honestly, he's really frightening. They did a good job with him, but he's like an intense dope fiend, and he's like all about the purge. He's all about violence. He's the one who gets the first kill in the purge. Like, he is the one on the ground that people are looking out for. So I introduced you to the main few characters. There's a few side characters, but it's like these are the main people. But let's quickly get into the summary of the movie. Now, this is all off top. I watched it a couple days ago, but I think I can give you a general consensus of what the movie is about. So let's get into that. So like I was saying before, the point of view of this movie is there is an experiment. Again, this is the first purge to ever occur. It is an experiment happening specifically on Staten Island, with the demographic being mostly people of color who are impoverished, and the new Founding Fathers are deciding to use that as a test site, specifically to see how the experiment kind of works out, because these people are poor, they're black, they're brown, and they supposedly are supposed to have all of the anger in society on them. So they want to see if they really embrace the purge as an idea and all of that. So they hone in on Staten Island, and the center part of that is the specific projects that Isaiah and Naya are from, and their communities from, because these are the poorest of the poor, and they're, everything is centered around the projects to see, are these people really going to go off? Are they that pissed at society as a whole? Are they going to just murder each other? Like I said, super controversial. There's some people in the projects who want it. There's some people in the projects who don't want it. Here's the important parts, though. If you participate in the purge, okay, let me break this down. So how the experiment goes is, okay, if you stay on Staten Island during the 12 hours that the purge happens, you automatically get $5,000. So again, because a lot of these people are in poverty, staying on Staten Island during the purge, even for however dangerous it might be, just without participating, they get $5,000. So a lot of people decided to stay. But if you participate in the purge, depending on how depraved and dark and deep you go with the violence and the crime you decide to commit, you get more money based off of that, okay? So that's how it's kind of set up. So again, it's this damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. It really reminds me of the Tuskegee Experiment, but we'll get more into my sociological commentary later. But it's important that you know that it's happening here specifically because of the population being poor and brown, and there's incentive to stay because they are handing out cash for the people who stay, and then more cash for the people who actively participate in the situation. And yeah, the purge happens, it starts, and Isaiah is supposed to be leaving across the Brooklyn Bridge to go to his father's house, right, to stay with his dad. That's what he told his sister. When in reality, he's deciding to stay in Staten Island and fully participate in the purge so he can get money for his sister and family so they can move somewhere else and live a nicer life. Again, most of his personality is, I hate being poor. So he's doing this thing behind Naya's back. Naya thinks he's on the train down going out of Staten Island, but he's actually there. And Naya herself has organized something with the local church because, of course, she's an activist for all the people who are staying for the money but not staying to participate to be in one central area. So she organizes with the local church, and she is organizing this shelter for everyone to stay and watch movies and sing and pray together and keep safe and eat food during the 12 hours that the purge is going on, because all of them are staying for the $5,000, right? Now, Dimitri is like one of those, he's like one of the stories of like the drug dealer with the heart, like kind of thing. And so he like obviously is very vicious. To be the top drug dealer in a place like that, you have to be. But he is telling his people it's just business as usual. We're making as much money as we can during the purge because we can openly sell drugs right now during the purge hours and not be fucked up. But we're not participating in the purge. We'll all get the $5,000 because we're staying here. But no one is supposed to kill people, do anything, or participate in the purge. We are just selling drugs. So that's the thing. Okay. So now you know everyone's position. Now, we're going to rewind a little bit to like the day before a few hours before the purge starts. Isaiah, in another attempt to quell his I hate being poor thing, he decides to go to a lower tiered man under Dimitri and try and start selling crack on the corner of the street or whatever to get money. And this is where him and Skeletor interact. And Skeletor basically is punking him like, I know you're new, your sister's sexy, let me have sex with her, and all of this stuff, like really punking him as this new green drug dealer. And he's like trying to get stuff for free from him, and Isaiah's like trying to stand his ground, and then Skeletor cuts him across the face. Skeletor cuts him across the face, and basically that's where their first interaction is. And Isaiah's really pissed about that because he gets punked in front of these guys that are selling drugs and whatever, and he has to go home and explain to Naya what happened. He lies to her, obviously. That's when he decides to stay on the island to make money and also commit crimes. Now we move forward to actually the day of the purge. Naya's organizing a protest across from the site where people are lining up to get their, special contacts and their tracking device to be able to get paid. And she's leading this protest. Clearly it's very divided, and then Dimitri shows up and he's like, talking to her, and you kind of see a little of the tension, and she's very pissed at him, and basically she calls him out and is like, you know what, you think the purge is bad, well, you do this to your community every day by selling drugs and doing all of this stuff, and like goes on this whole soliloquy about how he's a terrible person. And he's just kind of like, what else was I supposed to do? You grew up like me, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I'm straight and narrow and da-da-da-da. I'm trying to be a good citizen. And so they go at it. So their tension kind of becomes, obviously there's sexual tension, but there's a difference in ideologies and survival. And that's where that's established. Boom, boom, boom. Purge starts. Dimitri offers to let Naya and Isaiah stay with him, and she's like, no, I'm going to help my people, stay with my people at the church, even though she could stay in a well-protected area, obviously, because he has lots of people who are protecting him because he's a kingpin. And he himself is willing to share that fortress with her because he still loves her. Naya's at the church. Isaiah is lying that he's seeing with his dad. He's really in Staten Island trying to find Skeletor to kill Skeletor, and also get paid for his sister and him to have a better life. And Dimitri is, commanding stuff with his drug cartel or whatever. And subsequently, you see Skeletor come out, and he's very excited about the purge. He wants bloodshed. He wants all of that kind of stuff. And you also see from his point of view, like, what he's up to. He's shooting up, he's getting high, he's like, this is going to be crazy, and I'm going to get as much money as I can while also releasing my rage. So Skeletor has the first kill of the night because this guy basically is trying to rob an ATM, and then Skeletor comes up on him and, like, slits his throat and kills him. And he has this, like, weird, like, contraption that he made full of, like, needles, hypodermic needles. It's like kind of like a Wolverine thing, but with hypodermic needles. And it's like, obviously trying to push the narrative that he's this, like, drug fiend or whatever. So he has the first kill of the night, but after that it's pretty dry. Like, people aren't killing people the way that the chief of staff Arlo was expecting them to kill people. The people who are doing the experiment, running the experiment, collecting the data from the experiment. Then you have the people actually living the experiment. So what they're finding, though, is that people in the community are staying here for the money. They're not trying to kill people. They're just mostly trying to rob for more money and all of that. They're not trying to do too much. And the chief of staff, Arlo, is very pissed about this. He thought that there'd be more violence, blah, 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 blah. People are throwing purge parties. People are getting fucked up. People are just having community. And he thought they chose this specific community in order to see violence, okay? And then you have Dr. Updale, who's kind of like, wow, this is kind of strange. This is interesting data. She is participating in this because she brought this whole ideology into fruition and decided to test this theory that she made and she created. So it's more of an interesting thing to her. She doesn't understand that there's actually an agenda behind the purge becoming a nationwide thing. She just thinks, oh, the new founding fathers believed in my idea and they're letting me actually experiment with it in Staten Island. That's not the case. We'll get more into that later. Skeletor does his first kill. Mind you, the purge has been going on. People are having purge parties, but the people running the experiment behind the scenes aren't trying to have the nation see the people having fun and having community and hanging out. They're not trying to have people see that. What they are trying to have people see is the violence and the destruction. So Skeletor gets the first kill of the night, and they specifically say, now send that to all the news stations. So then the media gets on it and they're like, wow, like, this is gruesome, breaking news, da-da-da. Again, the entire nation is watching this experiment go down. So it's clear as you start to see the story unfold that there's an agenda behind the new founding fathers picking these people and what they're trying to convey to the people, even if it's not directly correct with what everyone else is doing, because Skeletor is one of a few people who want to actually be violent. He's not the majority of the people in the area at all, and not reflective of that. But they are not choosing to show the truth of what the experiment is showing, which is that people know these people in this community. They're using it as a party. They're hanging out. They're maybe robbing for some extra money at the most. They're not doing too much violent crime. Isaiah runs into some of the crew that was there when he got slashed by Skeletor earlier in the movie, and they're like, what are you doing here? Does your sister know you're here? Because they all know his sister isn't going to go for that, blah, blah, blah. And they are like, okay, well, we're headed to this purge party. The purge party looked lit as fuck. Everyone was just grinding and dancing, and it just seemed fun and free and funky. Everyone was having a fun time with like the glow sticks and stuff. And so it seemed lit, and everything seemed lit. So they're all at this party. And then they all get like a message on their phone, like a breaking news thing. And on it, they see Skeletor's the first kill, which is Skeletor's killing that guy at the ATM. So everyone's like, oh shit, this is kind of serious. And the mood changes of the party type thing. But then everyone's like, fuck it, we're partying, whatever. We're in a group. We're all on the same type of time. Like, we're going to just continue to chill. And then Skeletor ends up going to the party. And, you know, Isaiah and him have their first confrontation, but he goes to the party. He gets grinded on by this girl because she, even though he's really scary looking, to be honest, like in like a crazed out way, she's like, you know, fucking with it. And he's kind of fucking with it too. And then he stabs her in the stomach with his hypodermic needle thing. And then everybody in the party scatters except for Isaiah. And Isaiah got some gun that I think, you know, Naya had in the house for protection in order to kill Skeletor, and he raises it up to Skeletor. Obviously, he gets punched. He doesn't have the guts to shoot Skeletor. Skeletor's kind of like, do it. And then, you know, whatever. He starts running. There's a whole chase scene. Isaiah's in this big pickle. He's getting chased. He uses his phone to contact Naya and is basically like, I lied to you. I'm actually here and I'm being chased by Skeletor. She's like, where are you? What the fuck? And so basically she runs to go get him. And, you know, there's a whole confrontation with another group of people who are kind of on that violent time that are trying to, like, you know, grape her, if you know what I mean. And then she comes in contact with Isaiah. Then they have a direct like fight with Skeletor, and Skeletor is like really trying to like rape his sister. They're able to get free from Skeletor, and now they're running together. She's scolding him, blah blah blah, but she's trying to get back to the church so they're safe, right? It's crazy. Dimitri's end, there's someone early on in the group when he's like, we're not participating in the purge, we're just making money, we're about this money, one of the guys in his crew was like, nah, I want to participate in the purge, fuck you. And then Dimitri kind of stuns him in front of everyone and like puts a gun to his head, like, you need to shut the fuck up, I'm the boss, like, don't question me, we're going to do our drug shit, we're not going to be distracted by this killing people shit, like, no. So that's what happened in the beginning as he's like lecturing his crew before the purge, right? So Dimitri's in his penthouse and he's chilling, and he like texted Naya, and it shows that she didn't respond. And she like, there's like a whole montage of her being like, I'm not texting you back. Like, I don't care if you're asking how I am, like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you guys are so annoying. So then it's like, shut up and date each other. Like, clearly there's tension here, but whatever. So then, you know, one of his guys that's guarding his door to the penthouse is like, oh, you want me to call some girls up to come and keep you company? He's like, sure, bring the girls, bring the drugs. So two of like the call girls that I guess he likes to fuck, like prostitute girls or whatever, come through, and, you know, it's a night of vices. He's excited. These two, you know, they're about to fuck on him and have a good night type thing, and he's protected by his man, They're getting all close and stuff, and then both girls try to kill him. They try to kill him, and he's like, what the fuck? And there's a whole fight scene, and basically he keeps them alive, but he's like, who sent you? What's going on? Like, what is going on? Because these are his regular prostitutes that he hires or whatever. And they're like, we were paid by so-and-so, his name is capital A, who was a guy that was like, no, I want to purge. And basically what his goal was, he was trying to muscle to take Dimitri's spot type thing. Like, he was being disruptive. He's like, Dimitri ain't shit. And some people in that crew were starting to follow capital A. So he paid those girls to go up and try and kill him type thing. So Dimitri's like, oh, nah, this nigger's purging. Like, nah, like, fuck this nigga. So he gets all his crew together, And it tells him the situation and basically gets Capital A to meet up with them. Basically, he spares the girls' lives, but they're like, whatever. And basically he sets up a trap and he's like, tell him that you killed me or whatever. So they do a trap, meet up, blah, blah, blah. And then Dimitri and his crew come and surround Capital A and his crew, and he kills him in cold blood. Blah, 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 blah. And he spares the girls' lives, blah, 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 blah. Now, here is where things really get crazy. Let's go back to Dr. Updale and Arlo, the chief of staff. So, Arlo, the chief of staff, is super pissed. He's noticeably pissed. And Dr. Updale's starting to get this vibe that it's like, okay, I know I came into this with an open mind and an open heart and willing to find whatever we decided to find or whatever the data showed us about whether this experiment was viable to go nationwide. What's starting to become apparent, because the chief of staff is getting calls from the president, calls from the cabinet of the new founding fathers, and he's getting reamed a new asshole because the violence isn't violencing. There's just that first kill. There's a couple things that they're broadcasting, but it's not as violent. The data isn't showing what it's quote unquote supposed to show because these are black and brown people who are poor type thing. So he's getting reamed, and she's kind of like, why are you mad when this is just supposed to be an experiment? Like, there's no stake in having any, there's no like point in having any stake in any of the results that happen in this situation, because again, this is supposed to be an honest experiment. We're not supposed to fuck with the data. We're not supposed to do anything. We are just fully seeing if my theory is correct, right? And it wasn't. What she predicted was everyone was going to go ham, go crazy, and it was going to be a cathartic release. People were being nice. People were, creating community. People were just using this to get money. And, it wasn't going as planned. So we're seeing how things are starting to unravel. The chief of staff guy is kind of like, well, I need to make a call. So he goes to make a call. And, she's kind of like looking at the data like, this is just more interesting than anything because this isn't what I expected to come out of it. Like, I thought people would be more violent. And then all of a sudden she noticed that there's just this huge influx of violence. Like, there are this crew of people, all of these different people who are all wearing masks, hence the purge mask, who come into Staten Island, who are just ready for the kill. They're crashing cars, they're killing people, they're massacring people, they're going to where the purge parties are at, they're shooting it up, they're killing people, and they're all wearing these masks. And it's like hella weird because it's like, this isn't how the data was supposed to go. The data was supposed to show that people, increasingly got more violent as they realized like this is real. But then it was like, okay, this is at a plateau. Some people are robbing, some people are doing certain things, but it's not as violent as they expected it to be. But now all of a sudden there's just this huge influx of massive, massive violence, right? So she's like suspicious. And then the chief of staff comes back in and he's like, oh, she's like, whoa, like there's all this violence all of a sudden. Like, this is weird. This doesn't go with the data. This doesn't go with the data. And he's like, don't think too much into it. And it's like, girl, what did you do? You know what I mean? So then we go back to Dimitri, him and his friend that's been pretty loyal throughout. They're driving, they're trying to get back to the penthouse, and they're like, damn, like capital A, what an asshole, da da da. Then boom, they get T-boned in the middle by this bus that's on fire, like just boom, T-bone. Car flipped, boom, boom, boom. And they're like waking up in just exposed, da da da. Then they start getting surrounded by this group of people. So Dimitri is able to crawl out of the car. He's able to get his friend. And he starts going ham, shooting up the people, da-da-da-da-da, with all his guns. And he's like, this is super weird. Like, why do they all have masks? And he sees and he looks and he hears that these people have, like, headsets. And the headsets are telling them where there's a bunch of people and where they need to go in order to shoot up and, kill all these people in these random places. So he's like, this is weird because who is feeding them information about the location of these purge parties or the location where they need to be at in order to cause this chaos? So he starts to put two and two together on the ground like, oh shit, shit is fucked up. Like, something's happening. Then he sees that one of the guys has a tattoo, and his friend who was in the military is like, oh, these people are mercenaries. Like, they're like guns for hire mercenaries that someone hired. They have headsets. They're going out to kill people based on the direction of whoever is up enough to know where all these parties are happening. So he's like putting two and two together about what's going on the ground. This is crazy. Finally get to the church and it's massacred. They see these people run out of the church with the mass and drive off, and everyone in the church is basically massacred. So they're like, what the fuck? Like, this isn't safe. This is crazy. What's going on? So they're confronted with the reality that now there's a new element on the streets that is just violent for the sake of violence type thing. They're able to find the important people, the subplot characters or whatever, which is a mom and a daughter and this woman named Dolores who's supposed to be the comedic relief or whatever. And they're like, let's go back to the apartment building to be safe in our apartments, Dimitri is now kind of like, okay, let's get our crew, let's get all their guns, let's go hunt these people down and be about it type thing. Boom, boom, boom. And he's kind of like concerned about Nia and Isaiah because he's made this discovery. We go back to Arlo, the chief of staff guy, and the Dr. Updale, and basically one of the analysts is like, it's so weird because these people seem to know exactly where to go where there's the most people. They're like targeting places where there's a lot of people, which is weird because how would they be getting that information? So then Dr. Updale finally is like, something's wrong, we need to go and see who he called and what's been going on, and So they go into this specific deeper office, go into the guy's computer, and is able to basically see that he is the one who by command of the president of the new Founding Fathers movement called these mercenaries. They had these mercenaries on ice just in case they weren't getting the data they wanted. He called the mercenaries in order to show that, in order to get the data that they needed to take the purge nationwide. So he fucked with her experiment in order to get the exact data that they needed to show that the purge was successful and this needs to go nationwide. So then he catches her, they have a confrontation, and she's like, she's like, I was pure of heart and you took advantage of me, that kind of whole thing. And basically she's realizing the truth of what's actually happening, which is at the end of the day, what is going on is they are trying to do state-sanctioned genocide to the poor communities. They're trying to eradicate the poor communities in order to bolster the numbers of successful people in the United States, bolster the numbers, lessen the numbers of unemployment, lessen the numbers of overpopulation, and all of that through the purge. That's what the T is. It's supposed to be, we are doing this so they can kill themselves. The rich people have their fortresses, can afford all this stuff. Maybe they'll go out here and there in certain areas, but it's basically an open season hunt on the poor. And we're rounding out to the end. Basically, they end up in the apartment complex. It's a whole thing to get to their apartment complex, and basically because Dimitri is so skilled at fighting and killing all of these mercenaries, the chief of staff, Arlo, takes notice to that. So he's like, send as many people as you can to the apartment complex, to the projects, in order to find these people, in order to kill these people, right? So then they're being chased up the stairs to these people by the mercenaries, by the command of, whatever, and they have a big showdown, blah, 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 and then Dimitri dies protecting Nia and her brother, and Skeletor dies, and that's kind of how it all kind of comes to an end, and that's it, kind of thing. And then the purge becomes national news because Dr. Updale isn't there to be like, they fucked up the data on purpose in order to make it national news, and they hired mercenaries to kill these people. She's not there to say that. So they're like, the data shows that this was successful, so we're going to make it nationwide, and that's the end of the movie. No, that was all off the top. I know there's some parts where I kind of went back and forth, blah, blah, blah. But you understand. Basically, you understand the concept of the movie, blah, 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 blah. So, number one, we're coming in hot with the clear goal of experimenting on Black and brown people who are low income specifically. Okay? This is number one. Now, if you don't know, I did a true crime in society video on the Tuskegee Experiment, and I'm going to, in the next year, do a true crime in society video on the St. Louis chemical experiments that happened in Black communities in St. Louis. Sorry, I need to get comfortable. Of course, I'm wearing pajama pants. What did you expect? But I point those out because this is a real life example of what they're basically having a commentary about as being the linchpin of the whole movie. The point is, clearly these downtrodden people who are abused by society constantly are being used yet again as guinea pigs in an experiment that they have no control over, right? The experiment was going to happen whether or not it could or couldn't happen, right? The experiment was going to happen whether or not the people on the ground agreed with it happening, as we know. And so these Black and brown low-income people were either going to be forced to stay because they didn't have enough money to evacuate, or be enticed to stay because you get money for staying. So instantly when they were explaining how these people are deciding to stay or not stay, and how the experiment and who the experiment was targeting and all of that, I was immediately reminded of the Tuskegee Experiment. The Tuskegee Experiment essentially was an experiment done by a group, by the United States government over the course of 40 years, where the United States basically let a bunch of men with syphilis die and watched them die, and documented how syphilis took over their bodies without telling them they had syphilis and all of that stuff, even after there was a cure for syphilis, which came out after World War II. This is from the 30s to the 70s. And it was interesting because it was very similar in terms of the setup of the experiment. United States government funded. They went into this community that they had already found out had a high population of African American men specifically who had syphilis, and they enticed them by free meals, free healthcare for their family, free all of these things, free healthcare for themselves. These are rural people in the South who would normally never have access to this kind of thing, who are getting access to these benefits without knowing that by doing that, they were signing up for their bodies to be experimented on and to be observed through the context of like a lab rat, watching the body deteriorate over time. A lot of people died. A lot of people spread syphilis to their family because they didn't even know they had it. But the fact that the founding fathers set up the experiment in a low-income community and entice people to participate or at least stay, because it's like, you know, if you stay, yes, you get $5,000, but that's if you survive the 12 hours. You know, you're incurring some risk by staying. You, like the people in the church, they thought we're just staying together, we'll just be in the church, you know, blah 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 blah, we're just all gonna get our $5,000 and decide to stay. But in actuality, they had already rigged the experiment to not be in their favor by hiring these mercenaries that went in and killed them anyway. So none of them got the money because they were all killed, but they were enticed to stay because that's life-changing money to this particular sect or class of people in the population. So immediately I was like, Tuskegee Experiment. And the other experiment that I was referencing that I'm also going to do a True Crime in Society video later on next year is the St. Louis chemical experiments, where, again, funded by the government. I believe it was in the 1940s. There's obviously post-World War II, this fear of the Cold War, blah, blah, blah. We'll get into that there. But basically, the United States government sanctioned for chemicals to be sprayed openly in Black communities, specifically in this one project project community, similar to the Purge situation, where they're centering all of this on this particular projects in Staten Island. They were centering the spraying of this chemical mixture in the projects of St. Louis, with Black low-income people all being affected, and they sprayed it on streets. They sprayed it from the top of this project building for I think it was over the course of 10 years. They were spraying this. They didn't tell people what it was. They didn't let people know that it was harmful potentially. None of it. But of course, most of the people in that area were Black and were poor, and they ended up suffering from different rare cancers and all of that stuff, because it was later found out that the concoction had radioactivity involved in it, And again, similar experiment, similar situation, government funded for the good of the people. That there's that kind of underlying vibe, and that's what they put out there, for the good of the people. For the Tuskegee Experiment, it started out with, we're trying to find the cure to syphilis, but then they found the cure to syphilis, which is penicillin, but continued the experiment for another 30 years after the cure of syphilis existed. So it's clearly more of a sadistic thing than actually this, we're sacrificing few for the benefit of many. And who's the many who are benefiting, right? There's a lot of questions that come out in that conversation. Do you know what I mean? So conceptually, again, it's like they're really rooting the concept in something that is real to America, something that has happened and has continued to happen in America to this day. And I just love them for putting that angle into it. So that's number one. So I think it's important to discuss the racialized nature of the movie. This is a Black community, this is a brown community, this is low income. And again, I want to ground this story in not the fantastical, but the very real. Like, yes, this is a horror movie with exaggerations and stuff like that, but these are all things that are based in things that have actually happened. So the targeting of the Black community, the viewing them as nothing more than guinea pigs, the poor and the brown as guinea pigs. Did they go and do this in Beverly Hills or choose to have the experiment happen in Beverly Hills? No. They chose to have the initial experiment happen in these communities for a specific reason. And that's because Black, brown, and poor people are seen as disposable in American society. That is why we are often the ones getting experimented on, period. Another thing that I noticed, and it's kind of a small thing, but the fact that the church itself, Naya was centering her activism around organizing around the church itself as a safe haven, which if you're Black, if you're someone who studied anything regarding Black history in this country, you know is kind of a nod to that reality, because a lot of revolutionary planning happened within the Black church itself, because that was one of the only places that Black people could congregate without white people congregating as well around it and being suspicious. That was, just a segregated time. White people went to white churches, Black people went to Black churches, and they could be left alone to decide and plan revolutionary acts, such as the Montgomery boycott, which was basically centered around the structure of Black churches, the community of Black churches, and all of that, which in turn led to the modern day civil rights movement existing. So I thought that was interesting that Naya was like, we're all gonna be in this church together, because it's like, yeah, like that's very nod to the revolutionary acts of people in the past. So that was cool. I kind of hinted on this in the beginning, but it's the idea of the greater good, right? The greater good is a conversation that's always happening in this country. We sacrifice some for the greater good of many. That's the concept of war, obviously, but that's also what the concept of the Tuskegee Experiment was based on, because they're trying to find a cure for syphilis, when in actuality they did find the cure not through this experiment at all, and let people have syphilis, not know they have syphilis, spread it to their families, watch them die with syphilis and from syphilis, when the cure had already existed for over 30 fucking years. So it's this to me, it's such an empty statement for the good of, for the greater good. This idea that America uses to be able to kind of make brown, black, and low income people suffer without impunity. You know what I mean? For the greater good of the people, for the greater good. And that's why the purge, it's like a shell of a statement to me, because at the end of the day, it usually isn't for the greater good. It's for the greater good of a small sect of people, which is white Anglo-Saxon people in this country who are straight and heteronormative or whatever. It is not for queer people. It is not for black people. It's not the greater good for brown people or BIPOC people in general. It's not the greater good for trans people. It's not the greater good for poor people. It's a greater good for already well-off white people who are straight and Christian. Period. So that's the lens that the greater good is being taught through. You know what I mean? The greater good is being spoken through. It was never meant to include someone like me. It's never meant to include a black trans woman. It's meant to preserve whiteness, Christianity, heterosexuality, the status quo of America. So when they say, and they're using this experiment in the movie to say, this is what's going to save America. We are going to let people get their rocks off one day for 12 days, for 12 hours a day. They can murder people. They can do whatever. They can get extremely violent. And then after that, our society will run as is. But again, the underlying nature of that is the black people, the brown people, the poor people, all of these already vulnerable populations on any other day of the year are going to be even more victimized by this law than the average white wealthy person. You know what I mean? So with the syphilis stuff, with whatever, all of this greater good talk runs very hollow because they only say that to present the idea for the masses to agree to it, when in actuality there's usually something bubbling under the surface in order to make sure and maintain white supremacy in this country. Always. So I thought it was interesting that they were, because obviously this is a prequel and they're saying like, this is going to save the country. And it's like, no, it's not for the greater good. This is never for the greater good because we're never included in what the greater good is. So yeah. When I'm asked, what is a hood? To me, it's just a community of people trying to survive everything thrown at them, because they are not supposed to survive. That's why there are songs like The Rose That Grew Through Concrete, because that's the truth. It's a hard, tough environment to exist on purpose so that people don't exist, so that people aren't able to get out of it, so that people are able to be farmed, to be put into prisons and all sorts of stuff. The hood, and I think this movie did such a good job about talking about it because it was centered in the hood. That's the point of the experiment, right? But these people were just normal people trying to survive, trying to do anything to survive for their family, coming together, helping each other. And so what did they do in the experiment? They introduced things that were unsurvivable. They introduced mercenaries to purposely murder people in order to get the data they needed, in order to force the hand of the experiment to be what they wanted it to be, right? Chaotic. They wanted to show that these people were more violent. I mean, there's layers to it. But I think it was also asking the question, what is the hood actually without intervention of the United States government? What is it? What could it have been? I just love that point. I just think it was like, well, I don't know if it was intentional, child, but I read into it. The last point that I'll talk about is, obviously, all of this is under the huge umbrella of systematic racism. What they were trying to depict was systematic racism throughout the entire movie. They picked a group of people who were BIPOC, who were underprivileged, lower class, economically people, specifically to suffer through this experience, and they didn't get the results they wanted. So instead, they rigged the results in their favor in order to take the purge nationwide. And what you guys have to take from this movie, have to take from everything that I'm saying, is this shit is rigged. White people being superior is rigged. white people thinking they're superior is rigged, and it's all part of the process. It's all part of the construction of this society. It's all under the umbrella of systematic racism. And I'm going to add a clip in here about it.
Successful, honored in the halls of academe, etc., still have that encounter?
Yes, I do, Charlie, but let me tell you, that's the wrong question.
Okay, what's the right question?
How do you feel? Not you, Charlie Rose,
Right.
but don't you understand that the people who do this thing, who practice racism,
Right.
are bereft? There is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's a profound neurosis that nobody examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy. And it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people, and possibly equal as it does black people. I always knew that I had the moral high ground all my life. I always thought those people who said I couldn't come in the drugstore and I had to sit in this funny place, I couldn't go in the park.
Superior to them
I
from
did.
day one.
And I thought they knew that I knew that they were inferior to me morally. I always thought that. And my parents always thought that.
You said your father was racist because he always felt like he was
He always
superior.
felt, that's right. He always felt superior. And that was a form, of defensive racism. But if the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race. It's also constructed. It's also made. And it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out. And all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself? I mean, these are the questions. It's part of it is, yes, the victim, how terrible it has been for black
But you
people.
don't like that.
I'm not a victim. I refuse to be one.
And the victim is the other person who is morally inferior and
That's
who
a
has
serious
to hold
question.
on to
Of course.
racism
If you have to
somehow
hold, that's
for
it.
his or her own self-esteem and definition.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious.
I think that's directly shown in this movie. It's directly shown throughout the concept of this movie. I think they did a wonderful job conceptualizing this movie. The acting, again, but I highly recommend it just so you can see what I was explaining to you. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. But yeah, that's my last point. We are going to do 4 more of these. So next week we're going to be actually doing the very first Purge movie ever created, and we'll be discussing that, which will be exciting. Yeah, but that being said, all I have to say is, like, subscribe, comment on the video. It does better in the algorithm. You had watched all my ads on this. Your girl's trying to get paid. Yes, I am, unabashedly. Go follow me on all my socials, links in the description, and watch my videos that I reference in this video if you want more information on that. Links will be in this description as well. But again, without further ado, I guess all I want to say is Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. See you next week.